Hey, World Builders, welcome back to Shoutout Saturday, where I read your lore. This is Shoutout Saturday number 29. If you want to hear your own writing read aloud here among all of these other awesome, amazing writers, then come submit yours for the daily prompt in the Discord and tag it for Shoutout Saturday. That Discord link is in the description as always. We would love to have more writers. We cannot get enough of them. We are all interested in all kinds of world building we can get our hands on. So thank you if you do end up sharing. Now, let's read some lore. For day 294, the prompt was, what is a creature that straight up defies physics in your world? And this comes from Predwin the Great in the Discord. Predwin the Great writes, Elementals, an entry in Rust and Blood. Elementals are creatures of that have been around since the very beginning of both turmoil and anarchy. Though the former is the oldest of the two, elementals, though they share a home with demons, are not innately hostile or malefic in nature. Still, elementals remain incredibly dangerous to interact with without proper equipment, training, and a good sense of self-preservation. Elementals inhabit a part of called the Weird, which according to demons and conversive elementals alike is far more hostile and volatile than any other part of being so corrosive to anything except elementals that even archdemons dare not tread there, lest they be destroyed completely. This environment is heavily swayed by the prime immortal forces, the fonts of fire, frost, water, earth, electricity, misery, wrath, and metal. When these mortal fonts wax or wane, their presence in the weird grows and shrinks accordingly, spawning more or less elementals of the font's respective attitude. An elemental spawned of the fire font will be more aggressive, assertive, and loose in decision-making. An elemental born of the metal font will instead be calm, decisive, and logical. Elementals other than attitude are completely identical in their appearance and power, though their strength does increase the longer they live. Elementals can very rarely manifest in the mortal realm without assistance. These so-called true elementals, as hoity-toity scientists call them, are innately non-hostile to mortals, though certain stimuli or miasmic corruption can turn them to violence. There is no easy way to tell what kind of elemental is inhabiting their host material. A fire elemental may be bound to rock and can be identified as thus through visible observation of the behaviors the true elemental provides, whereas a lightning elemental may inhabit a derelict mech, though in this circumstance it makes a grain of sense. In summary, any elemental can inhabit any material, and the only way to identify what elemental is inhabiting said material is by observing the behavior of the true elemental. Elementals can also freely inhabit the natural world. These manifestations are visible as fleeting sights of glowing sprites. These elementals are drawn to their font of origin, fire sprites in areas of extreme heat, frost sprites in blizzards, metal sprites fluttering around massive machines. Elemental sprites can also manifest around weirds that match their font, such as frost sprites being drawn to stags no matter the temperature in the area, and the earth sprites being drawn to gargoyles no matter how much ground is near. The name of both the elemental realm and the name given to monster souls are absolutes, words that are known to all who ask, granted by innate knowledge programmed into mortal minds. This suggests, in some cosmic celestial way, that elementals and monsters are innately tied to one another, though this has yet to be proven in any significant way other than a small selection of monsters acting as magnets to elementals. An elemental can be bound to a piece of technology or building to operate it. The easiest and only known way of binding an elemental is through the use of a spirit complex. These large crystals are often covered with program script, an alien language that holds power over elementals, but we can talk more about program script and its rules another day. Bound elementals are often forced into their situations and can become resentful if not properly cared for. An alternative and dangerous solution to this plight is binding an elemental to a blank spirit complex. Elementals bound to a blank complex can freely leave their housing whenever they wish, though most choose to stay in their housing out of a fayish interest in the world. This relationship between handler and elemental is built on trust and respect. An elemental appreciates being bound to something important to its handler, feeling out their emotions and responding accordingly. Some elementals are better or worse at this part of a bonding stage between handler and elemental. Water elementals are highly adept in reading emotions, whereas misery elementals are downright awful at reading their handlers. No matter what kind of elemental you're stuck dealing with, time is a handler's best friend. Never, under any circumstances, should you place a fresh elemental into a machine that can cause harm to mortals. Elementals don't share the same thoughts as us and don't understand the finality or consequences of death or injury. Elementals will often just attack and kill mortals just because they either don't understand their power or just wanted to see what would happen if they slammed their massive claws onto an unsuspecting worker. It is a handler's duty to guide an unshackled elemental to do what a mortal would call the right thing, no matter how it conflicts with the elemental's own beliefs. Elementals are incredibly powerful allies that often side with the forces of life rather than those of Eternum. The most favored people of turmoil in the eyes of elementals are the Havenites, whose mighty city is spread in tale to every elemental in the weird. Elementals are basically treated like gods in Havenhold so long as they obey, and given it's so easy to abide by humans and elves, why not give it a try? On the other hand, elementals in their entirety hold great enmity towards both the children of Ragash and demons, a supernatural hatred that seems to be ancient and eternal. Elementals, even when commanded through program script, will become so overwhelmed with rage that they may completely disregard any programs or commands once they catch a glimpse of one of these two foes just to pummel them into nothing. Fire and wrath elementals are the most prone to this, and metal and misery elementals the least likely to act on their rage. There exists a fine line between obedience and death with a handler and their elemental, whether or not that it is programmed or natural. Always treat an elemental fairly, lest you lose your life. Friends can become foes in mere moments, mortal. I should know. Cool. This is a little bit like a grimdark or more eldritch version of the Spren. This is the thing that immediately connected me. I don't think that you have read the Stormlight Archive from what I have heard, Predwin. Brandon Sanderson has these things called Spren, which are concepts, almost sprite-like entities that represent concepts like gravity and concepts like glory and concepts like pain and other things. And when those concepts are like at their strongest in the material world, these Spren manifest, and it's a really cool way to do some like subtle world building and subtle imagery and stuff in some places, and really draw out feelings. And I don't think it's exactly the same, but it made me think, because Spren can also be like trapped in machines that can do sort of technologically impressive things in the Stormlight Archive as well. So kind of cool connections there. For day 299, the prompt was, are there any places in your world where death is common or where a large amount of casualties occurred at once, like an active war zone or place where a natural disaster once struck? This comes from Predwin the Great in the Discord. Predwin the Great writes, the Coast of Countless Corpses, an entry in What Lies West. The Coast of Countless Corpses, also known as the True Coast, is a location on the shores of Balfora, around the center of the mapped region. The True Coast, as scholars and nobles often call it, is where the first ever fleet of ships entered Balfora, to great casualties. A fleet of over 120 ships was destroyed by coral spines under the waves that were completely unavoidable. The formations ripped apart the bottoms of the ship's hulls, and the waves slashed their occupants against the razor-sharp coral. Over 4,000 souls are lost in 12 minutes, and to this day, the wreckage of those ships can be seen beneath and above the waves, their spoils and soldiers all lost forever. Short but sweet. All right. The True Coast. And we have a little piece of a map here. Interesting. We're gonna see a little bit more of this map kind of fill in as we go through this Shoutout Saturday, so look forward to that. Nugget writes, there is no apocalypse in Petrichor, an entry in Petrichor. Petrichor has been confined in the mountains for centuries, slowly drowning in rainwater and going mad from citywide cabin fever to the point they no longer remember the sun even exists. This is all just how things are for them, but if it's this miserable, why don't they leave? They've been here so long that they do not remember the world outside. They do not remember the sun. They do not remember the countless bodies in the catacombs that couldn't fit in the cemeteries. They do not recall the corpses outside the city, buried and preserved in the sand, dried to the point they cannot decay. They do not remember the end of the world. The smell of Petrichor is in the air. A storm is on the horizon. What they do not know cannot hurt them. A nice little late entry from Nugget that I was thankfully able to get around to. I'm glad that Nugget reminded me, because otherwise I was going to forget, which has happened in the past and will probably happen in the future. I do apologize for that. But fun little, inspired by There Is No War in Bossing, say, great stuff. I dig it. For day 300, the prompt was, what is the longest anyone has ever ruled a nation or government in your world? This entry comes from Predwin the Great, the White Queen. Predwin the Great writes, the White Queen, an entry in Rust and Blood, specifically Turmoil. Players of Predwin the Great, this contains spoilers, you have been warned. Skip forward to the timestamp on screen, and there will be no more. Themestria is old, older than recorded human, dwarven, even Oricadian history. The records kept in their massive, now derelict archive buildings point to a history of strife, of turmoil. Ruler after ruler claimed themselves king or queen or high sultan, but none of them were ever respected on a wide scale, none except the White Queen, of course. The White Queen began her life on the western side of Gurlaw, and while her non-military career and life is unrecorded, from the moment her soldiers first called out her name to her last recorded speech, her entire life was recorded to be remembered for infinity. The White Queen made a claim to the east, to the snowy island, or what it is now called Drukai. She marched her army through the territories of dozens of sultans, slaughtering any who dared stop her from reaching the great palace. Her armies grew and grew with each of her neighbors' regions she marched through. Her weapons grew more and more mighty with each town she conquered. Finally, near the end of her journey, just before the Great Channel, now known as the Sovrek Canal, she was met face to face with Drukai's ancient ruler, who himself was completely erased from history due to one slight miscalculation on his part. That mistake, of course, being his audacity to even face the White Queen, for she wielded a power like nothing else. The power to inflict her own and her army's celestial corruption onto others, the ability to smite her adversaries with the might of the very heavens. The White Queen struck down her opponent so hard that his or her entire existence, past and future, was completely forgotten through time and space. Even Ophiax, the Winding Workshop, forgot their name and face if the stories are to be believed. After claiming her throne in what is now called the White Palace, she lived longer than any other mortal in history, trying with all her might to unite her peoples and stop any foolish wars that might have started. She lived for 3,000 years, though she was unable to completely unite Themestria. She still coerced many to her side until one murder sparked a war like none other. One single Khazarah Pip was struck and killed by some nameless Thmestrian, and we all know how that ended. The Great Sin. The White Queen's life ended as she screamed for mercy while crawling away from demons of the Ulthrep domain, laughing at her as she cried for help from her now long-dead armies and citizens. And so, the greatest ruler in history died, to be nearly forgotten, and still barely understood. I remember talking about during the Q&A, striking people out of existence, which I thought was neat. Isn't there a Doctor Who episode or something where something like that happens? I have not watched very much Doctor Who, but I remember an episode that does something like that. I'm just trying to make connections where I can. And I like this. The White Queen is a pretty compelling story, even relatively short piece of mythology, but interesting. I would love to see a fleshed out version of this sort of journey she has, towards Drukai. For day 301, the prompt was, are there any ancient warrior orders in your world? And this prompt comes from Probin the Great in the Discord. Curio Heart, v3.5 RC4, writes, the Foundry and the ISCs of old. Valley Forge is an old city with a long history, including its share of warriors, soldiers, and bounty hunters. While the mega-corporations have had their own paramilitary outfits for well over a century, it used to be that independent security companies, known as ISCs, were the primary way businesses and individuals around Valley Forge would hire protection. That changed a century ago. In an event known as the Collapse, VizCorp sent a team of the best hunters in the city, a proud and honorable company known as the Ashen Order, into a tower in the downtown area to secure a weapon that threatened the city. What nobody knew was that it was a trap. With the Order on the top floor, the tower's supports were destroyed by remote charges, collapsing it under the Order. Almost overnight, the ISCs were either forced out of business or into hiding as the megacorporations leveraged the incident to secure their hold over the security industry. The message was clear. ISCs could not be trusted with sensitive jobs. While the Ashen Order was destroyed that day, however, another company went underground, pivoting from open soldier to discreet guard. Once a shining bastion for hunters looking to do some good in Valley Forge, the Foundry quickly pivoted to a band known only through whispers in the shadows and enough names to make a chameleon jealous. Within years, nobody knew who they were, yet everyone knew who to get into contact with if you needed something done quietly and done right. It wasn't until about 6 years before current events that the Foundry decided to become a known entity again, sensing that the world was shifting in a way that such a move would be beneficial to them. Bringing old world knowledge and post-collapse skills to the present day, anyone who hired the Foundry knows they're paying for protection from an ISC that can stand toe-to-toe with any corporation's military with a fraction of the people. Nobody knows who leads it or how many pre-collapse hunters are still alive. Even today, public paperwork puts the company as its own owner, and nothing reveals more than simple numbers about the ISC. One, a hulking, gray-skinned, and hairless man named Aether, seems to know the company's entire history, and the few jobs he's since credited to the Foundry are ones that nobody had figured out in decades. Jobs that had become legendary, not for their success, but their level of execution. A top corporate kill squad caught in a trap and slaughtered by people who were never seen. A 20-minute chase through the city ending in a dead-end alley with nobody around. A top-floor break-in of VizCorp where the only change was a note was added to that then CSO's desk and left no footage to explain anything. Jobs that could only be so flawlessly executed by people who ingrained secrecy and anonymity within every aspect of their lives. Jobs that had ghost written all over them, yet all of them would actively deny. And if rumors are to be believed, there is also a hunter out there who was once counted among the Ashen Order, still alive after more than a century, and thought to have knowledge that could be revelatory toward the truth of the collapse. Nice. It feels very cyberpunk, especially in this piece with the mega corporations attempting to shove out independent security groups. And then what always ends up happening is you get an underground group that sort of tries to take over the blind spot that the megacorp can't cover, and then this all checks out pretty well and makes a lot of sense. Very cool. Probably the Great writes, The Sons of Israeld, an entry in what lies west. In the east, numerous factions squabble over access to ports and ships to send their faithful to Balfora, one such faction being an ancient order of dwarven Templars who worship Israeld Actraz, also known as the Mage Eater. These Templars, the Sons of Israeld, view mages of all kinds as forces of nature that must be slaughtered if the world is to ever be safe. They see magic as a plague on the world that has made it reliant on the arcane far too much. As such, all magic is to be hated, except runes, of course, for that is not magic, at least according to these dwarves. The Sons of Israeld have governed massive chunks of the East for a very, very long time, perhaps even before man awoke. Still, luckily for most mages as dwarves, they don't leave their holds much, going on crusades only every 100 years or so to cleanse the lands around their holds and nothing more. Though, with the boom in mages and other spellcasters going to the west, the Sons of Israeld fear that they may create a heretical empire of wizards that will never be capable of destruction. Thus, in their wisdom, they have begun what is known as the Great Feast, an event to fill the stomach of the Mage Eater with the souls of hundreds, perhaps thousands of cowardly witches. They sponsor raids into the west as well to root out and destroy any ancient arcane artifacts they find so that they can never fall into the wrong hands. The Conrad family tolerates and even directly works with the Sons of Israeld, preferring to have the 3,000 or so angry Templars on their side rather than as a foe. The Sons of Israeld, as one may suspect, are in direct opposition to the Scholars of the Northwest, with the two factions fighting a proxy war with mercenaries while they plot for a true battle to shake the world. Nice. This is an aspect that's a little bit not super in Atovia, actually, that I want to play with in a different setting at some point. I really love groups that despise or even claim is despicable or heretical the current way that magic is used, or the current existence of magic, or the very existence of magic at all in a setting, and then sort of seek to wipe it out in some regard because it's a blight on the planet that they live on. It's not really a thing in Atovia because meta work is so ingrained, but I want to mess with this in something else because I do really like it. It's very compelling. For day 302, the prompt was, are there any noteworthy bodies of water in your world? And this comes from Predwin the Great in the Discord. Predwin the Great writes, Emerald Resfrisic, an entry in what lies west. Twixt the choking valleys of Cabas Caldor, there is a unique and ancient artifact that has changed the entire valley. The so-called Resfrisic, a mighty stone and iron wall in the valley that choked the river eons ago, before the dwarves left Balfora and forgot their history. This reservoir, in the tongue of man, is one of the few dwarven ruins still left standing after all this time, still functioning as a clockwork generator that powers a now retaken hold to the east in the Cabas Caldor against the artificial lake. Inside the lake, a strange variation of algae filters out the ash and grime the active volcanoes of the mountains produce. In times of old, this was likely used as an effort to control the pollution and allow fish to live peacefully, but without any oversight for thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of years, the algae has grown uncontrollably, smothering the reservoir and its connected lakes in the Cabas of old, and preventing any life from propagating in the rotten green waters. The area surrounding the hold and the reservoir have both been taken by the Waywards, a legion of vagabonds that hold illicit power over Balfora, the dwarves of all factions being very unhappy that their ancestral halls are being pillaged and defaced by mere bandits, though they can't do anything about because, well, their ancestors did too good a job fortifying the holds, and the bandits can simply wait out any armies that show up or unleash all hell with the decrepit but still very functional defenses inside the holds. Nice. Really fleshing out the dwarves a bunch here. Very cool. This specialized algae's neat little take. Just a little thing, but sounds pretty cool. The Wanderer writes, the Great Eritane Sea. While the entirety of Endrin only has one proper oceans and a few epicontinental seas, there is one that stands above the rest under, of course, the overarching ocean of everything. That being the Great Eritane Sea. Unsurprisingly, it's the ocean that surrounds Endrin's central continent, Eritane. It's surrounded by the encompassing ring of supercontinents that divides the outer sea from the inner one, which is the Great Eritane Sea. Due to its isolation with only a few relatively small entrances to the outer sea, this epicontinental ocean is largely calm. Its currents just lead into itself and allows for mostly fair travel. A particularly popular area along it is the Silver Coast. The entire west end of Eritane is comprised of over 34 countries that have signed a trade agreement, making for a merchant's dream and for prosperity all around. Nice. This gives a pretty interesting picture of the Endron landscape. I feel like I can envision the bit of the donut that this kind of makes. Nugget writes, the Drowned Sea, an entry in Petrichor. Petrichor sits in the middle of a rain shadow within mountains too tall for clouds or people to get past. Water is directed downwards, both through the topography of the city and also the drainage systems. A lot of this water is put underground to be filtered and used for drinking and agriculture, but most of it eventually gets dumped off a cliff at the edge of the city, where it is also used to generate most of the city's power. The Drowned Sea is the name of the sea or lake residing at the bottom of Petrichor, where the excess water gets drained into. It also provides a lot of seafood, albeit expensive, given the dangers of navigating the cliff to get close to the water, but it can be done. The same can't be said for traveling the Drowned Sea. The constant storms of Petrichor make the sea quite violent, and anyone who's tried to leave by water has either never gotten very far or never returned. But perhaps the most impactful effect of the lake on the city is the evaporation. For as much water gets dumped into it every day, most eventually evaporates back up into the air and sky, where it, once again, gets poured onto Petrichor in the never-ending rain cycle that has plagued them for centuries. This is interesting. Have you looked into evaporation quantities in cold environments? I'd be so interested to know if a substantial amount of evaporation still occurs, or is this magical evaporation, which, I mean, it wouldn't be that surprising either. And evaporation would also cause a lot of cooling effect as well, right? Because part of the way that a human cools their skin is the evaporation of your sweat, because that wicks heat away, draws heat away from the body. Interesting stuff to think about. For day 303, the prompt was, are there any infamous or famous forests/marshes in your world? This prompt comes from Predwin the Great in the Discord, and Predwin the Great writes, Crud Morgor's Woods, an entry in What Lies West. On the eastern coast of Balfora, in the territories dominated by the Waywards, there lies an inconspicuous wee forest that contains within a bounty of mushrooms and fruits ripe for foraging. But alas, for any who go into these woods without permission from its master will meet a most grim fate, for they will come face to face with that master of the forest, Morgor. Morgor, you see, is a very articulate ogre, a student of higher commerce and intellect. He fancies himself a lord, and the forest he inhabits his land. When the Waywards first made their buildings on the true coast in the port of Free Stuff, Morgor made his first appearance to ensure they knew whose land it really was. His. The small militia and governor of Free Stuff met Morgor in the fields outside the forest, where the ogre loomed over them at least 16 feet tall, his body covered in wooden armor and briars. The ramshackle guard were quivering in their boots when Morgor made his offer unto them, seeing an opportunity to finally have subjects to call his own.
These woods and this coast is mine, Sniblets. You want to live here, then you got to pay the toll.
His booming voice shook the nerve out of any who would hear him and carried on over the mountains to be heard by all in their territories. Or so they say. Needless to point out, a handful of ruffians and vagabonds stood no chance against Crud Morgor, and the city of Free Stuff would rather stay where they are, looting the waters to the east. So, with a hate to their pride as thieves and bounty hunters, the men and women of Free Stuff agreed to Crud Morgor's terms and yielded his woods to him, never to enter without his majesty's permission. I love characters like this. I have a more sentient troll as well that exists. He's not an ogre. He's a troll, but, same difference. Come at me in the comments, I dare you. And he lives in a forest just near a little town called Georgetown in Etovia, and kind of like takes care of people and stuff. He's just a sweet little guy. Not the same here, but I like these when they can talk a little bit more when they're supposed to and have personalities. The Wanderer writes, The Great Sleepless Forest of Garish. By now, I suppose it's not a surprise that I say Endron is massive in functionality. It might as well be endless. There is always more places to visit, more isles to find, and more woods to discover. Even traveling its great distances, seeing a true map of its grand scale, and hearing stories from thousands of distant corners, I won't ever see all of it, and I'm both ancient and immortal. So with that said, let me tell you of the greatest forest in size in the entirety of all Endron, the Great Sleepless Forest of Garish. I could tell you the factual numbers, the endless hundreds of thousands of square miles of dense old-growth woods, or how it would take a behemoth nearly a month to cross it with their great strides, but that doesn't truly grasp the scale of a forest such as this. All that does is tell you that the number is large, so picture instead for me an ocean, one so big and vast, and you only have yourself. You might be a great swimmer, or not, but all the same, you cannot swim across an ocean. And if you somehow could, you'd find all sorts of wonderful, mysterious things deep inside it, things you wouldn't see elsewhere. Now imagine that ocean was trees, and instead of swimming, you walk. Sure, if you have great resources, are skilled with foraging and survival, you could travel into those woods for your life. But unless you're immortal, you'll very likely see yourself grow gray before you reach the end of it, and like many forests unbothered by people, it slowly grows its borders. There is a legend about the forest. Enough hearsay to grant enough merit to consider that the forest doesn't just grow, but that it is an afterlife of sorts for trees, that every time a tree dies, it ends up in that great sleepless forest to rest. Quite often other plants are added, but trees do tend to be the most often examined of their kind. If true, it could surmise that the forest holds nearly variants of trees within itself. I'm assuming it means nearly endless variants of trees within itself. Correct me if I'm wrong, wonder if you meant something else there. But very cool. I love giant forests. My wife a long time ago had found this sort of world-building idea of a forest that gets deeper and deeper as you go into it, similar to an ocean as well, actually similar to the analogy that you used here. And I really love that concept of descending deeper and deeper into something that becomes that stays the same fundamental thing. It remains a forest, but becomes more and more odd and whimsical and maybe frightening as you go in. For day 304, the prompt was, if someone needs to move a heavy load vertically for construction or transport, how is it done in your world? Now, there were no prompts at the time of me recording this, and 304 was a little ways away now, and so I wasn't going to go and ask people, because I do believe this is the only one that we're missing any submissions on, so I just put my own in. So I wrote, Nimble Flight Suits, an entry in ShouSa. The nimble of the sky people are mighty in their strength, capable of carrying and even flying with a load equal to their weight over long distances. This makes delivery around the home of Safety High relatively easy, as a single courier can take a large package across the entire continent in only a week. However, what of trade between the surface of ShouSa and their extremely elevated homeland? This is where the wings of blinding glint have allowed technology to fill in the gaps that their biology otherwise would find insurmountable. Nimble flight suits are a two-layered wearable piece of Metalejo-infused technology. The first is for warmth and integrating, a carapace-tight suit that hugs the abdomen and wraps around each wing joint. Over top of the undersuit is a lightweight metal frame that supports and aids the wings and has several different strap options to aid in the carry of large goods. Additionally, to the augmentation of wing strength, the Nimble flight suit's Metalejo draws in the density of the air around it, helping the Nimble of the sky to breathe and providing a bit more substance for wings to push against. While the boost to strength and flight by a Nimble flight suit is not extreme, it allows for two key things: altitude-agnostic flight and easier collaborative flight when carrying much more massive loads. With these, the wings of Blinding Glint are capable of moving huge quantities of goods to and from the home of Safety High and the islands of the once North Sea. For day 305, the prompt was, what is the strongest power couple in your setting? And this comes from The Wanderer in the Discord. The Wanderer writes, when a demigod and a mage collide. In the age of the Starlit, after the recovery of the Spell War and into the advent of the invention of guns, was born a demigod, the son of Versailles, the Dread Queen herself. She, who was over the entirety of hell in scope, a greater god, had a demigod child. Under most instances, a child of the greater gods would usher in a new god, for even the smallest amounts of divinity would allow for it. But she chose a fully mortal man, perhaps because she wanted her son to have full agency, or another purpose. It's known only to her machinations. But a healthy son was born, one with power rivaling gods, but a demigod all the same. Thus was born the Dark Pariah. A prophecy of bloodshed was spoken of him. He would face wars and powers and would destroy them, for good or for evil, unknown. So the Starlit feared him. The Doomsfolk Golds disdained the idea that he wasn't properly god like them. When the Apocalypse Advice, the Butcher, stole him when under siege of one of Versailles' castles, and raised him with the best morals she could muster, the Abyssal Gods hated him because he was no longer a weapon for them. Amongst all the gods, only his mother had full faith in for him. And to that mantle of expectations he lived up to it. He was one of the most powerful demigods to be born, shying closely under the cosmics from the old world. Armadia Petra Moore, from the high wealth of the Moore family, in a part, born as the heiress of the estate by a family that wanted a son. When she was 12, she was sacrificed to an abyssal god, but found the carrier servant killable. She grew up in the Abyss, surviving in its hostile lands. As young of an arcane student as she was the descendant of Chevron, and as such was a powerful mage of her own right even as a kid. She escaped the Abyss and studied magic, becoming a full-fledged mage by 19. Then she began her plans to return and strike revenge on her mother and father. However, on her quest for revenge, she encountered a wandering demigod, himself nearly 18, and on a quest. Seeing him a powerful ally, she journeyed with him, if out of nothing else, convenience, and to learn. As they traveled, her desire for revenge dimmed, and her desire to make the world better grew. As both of them grew in power, their fondness for each other grew. As much as they claimed to dislike each other, it was in large part lies. Annoyed, yes, but dislike, never. They decided a marriage would be the best way to spite each other, but as the wedding neared, they discovered plots, and Auhminous faced her mother's dark machinations, and while revenge was her desire no longer, necessity forced its hand. Now, Auhminous had no other siblings. Her mother had accidentally killed that possibility when bargaining with old gods, so Auhminous inherited the entire Moor estate. So a powerful demigod who could rival gods, and a powerful, quite very wealthy mage became a couple, and for a very long time were one of the most powerful couples in all of the mortal planes. Bit of a marriage of convenience, but sounds like a lot of convenience. So, you know what? More power to him. Kendamarania writes, The King of Flies and the Sea Serpent. Beelzebub, formerly known as Baal, the king of Corpi ever since the mid-1800s, was notorious for having an extremely private life and shunning away from public eye. The pressure put upon him as Chief Justice of one of the most influential nether cities in hell, as well as judging the sins of every human soul that falls to Corpi's vicinity, caused the king to be the target of many people's blame for the horrid conditions and state of the city. However, Beelzebub did have an escape from the stresses of monarchy, one of his own political advisors, Leviathan. Leviathan was a fallen angel, just like Beelzebub, a holy being meant to protect the seas under God's watch. However, as Earth was created and the first men came to fruition, he came to envy the freedom humans had and deplored God's watch over him, so he attempted to usurp heaven from the seas, wanting to decimate humanity so he could have Earth for himself. He caused a great flood from his own size and survived only by a single ark crafted by one man. Leviathan was defeated by the angels and was forced to retreat into hell. There he came upon the city of Pandemonium, ruled by Lucifer and advised by his second-in-command, Beelzebub. Leviathan was offered a high position as one of Pandemonium's princes, chief advisor to the king, due to his great feat of drowning nearly all of humanity. He accepted, and for the next 1,000 of years, he and Beelzebub played second fiddle to an increasingly tyrannical king. The two initially started as simply colleagues who respected each other. However, as time continued and their hatred towards humans subsided, they became personally involved with each other as friends and eventually lovers, as they felt comfort and ease with each other. As the Pandemonium Revolution erupted, the two left the monarchy with a fellow prince, Sathanas, to overthrow Lucifer and bring peace. Sathanas then attempted to execute the two as he began his rule of terror over the city, but they turned public support against him and had him executed for treason, with Beelzebub now taking up the mantle of king. With the capital being moved to the port town of Corpi, the two failed to marry due to their positions of power being under intense scrutiny by the Ars Goetia. Still, they maintained an informal relationship away from public eye, adopting several demonic children that would later gain political positions in Corpi. As the other three princes perished from war or natural causes, they leaned toward each other more than ever as the city began to fall into chaos and vice following the Sinners' War, with nothing they could do to attempt to stop it. The following is an excerpt of a private memoir written by Beelzebub, who was known to divulge in literature and writing in his spare time. Here we are alone at the edge of God's kingdom. Why he has forsaken us, I do not know. What I do know is that he had given me one final blessing before I fell into the void with Lucifer. An advisor, a friend, a lover, a survivor like me. For that, I will say amen, even from a disgraced king such as I, that God would shun. Trying a little bit on the accent, and so I kind of just went for that one. I haven't studied as much as I would have liked to yet, Kendamarania, but this video is a bit of a panicked one in terms of trying to get it out in time, so I'm doing my best. Let me know what notes you've got here. Fun one to read. Nugget writes, I'm here. I'll always be right here. An entry in Petrichor. There are no words to describe how I feel about my beloved Rose, but I will try. He is half of my soul, as the poets say. I would know him by touch alone, by smell I would know him blind. If we could live within the same skin, I would desire nothing more. I was convinced he didn't like me when we first met. He's aloof. He always has been. He's also always been very ill. His entire family got sick when we were first courting, and I took care of him. I was there for him as his father, and 2 elderly siblings died. I cooked for him. I played my violin for him. I held him. I'm here. I would say I'll always be right here. Despite the tragedy, we grew quite close during that time. He refused to be sworn into the council without me there. When he was ready, we started dating properly, and I couldn't be happier. We got married in our 20s. While we have our standard bands, my true pride comes from the brooch he gave me. His family had this tradition of sorts to give its members a brooch when they fully came into the family. I've worn it ever since as proof that we are one. That means more to me than any ring or vows would. I swore I would be there for him in sickness and in health, till death do us part. I do not believe this. I do not think even death nor the gods could separate us, and I stand by this even now. I am not a fool. I know how our union was received. People think he should have married more status. They think I'm after something else. They think he dirtied his blood and his family name. They think I betrayed the revolution. I do not care. They can think what they want, but I married because I love this man, and when I feel something, I feel it in my very spine, with every fiber of my being, until my very soul is consumed. My passion burns at me like an inferno, and my grief is like none even the gods could feel. There was no ignoring my heart once Rose had it, and if the city or even the gods hated me for it, so be it. So long as I'm with him, I may die happy, and I'm sure he feels the same. After all, he's so much more influential than I. If he wanted something better, he'd have no trouble getting it. We both made social sacrifices to be with each other. I would have it no other way. We were happy for a while, even with political tensions, and then he got sick, very sick. He's always been ill, but not this bad. The decade has strange ways of showing its favor, but it hurts to see him in pain. I took care of him, as I often did during his flare-ups. I'm here. I'd say I'll always be right here. I remember even back then he was so scared. He became very withdrawn as his condition continued to worsen. Spending more time locked in his study, refusing any company, including me. I vividly remember a time I had to break his door open after I heard him collapse, and he was completely unresponsive when I called for him. I found him on the floor, the entire study covered in blood, organs, and illegal tomes. I didn't care. My beloved was in pain. I needed to be there for him. I tore into quite a bit once I realized he was still alive. Apparently, he had been mutilating himself for some time, trying to stave off the infection. As horrific as it was, he was apologetic I had to see him like that. He didn't want to bring me down with him. It was hard to process at first, but I eventually realized the same thing he already had. He was dying. He was dying, and I couldn't lose him. I couldn't bear to lose him. He figured out necromancy is his salvation. It's illegal. It's destructive. His body keeps rotting, and I swear to you, some part of his soul is gone ever since he touched it. But I love him too much. So I helped him. Even as he got worse, I never left his side. If he needs me to represent him in the council, I'll do so. If he needs someone to cover up his actions, I'll do so. If he needs stolen organs to keep his rotten body functioning, I will dye the sheets red with blood so he may have what he may receive them. The blood hasn't washed off my hands, but I do not care, for I do it of love. Everything has been out of love. He's still in there somewhere beneath all of the rot. I try my best to care for him. I still bring him food. I still play to him to calm him down. I still hold him through the pain, singing softly and telling him that it's okay. I'm here. I say, I'll always be right here. People think me mad. They always have. They do not understand my feelings, our connection. Words alone cannot hope to describe it. If I am mad with love, I dare not be sane. I would rip my ribcage open to offer my still beating heart to my beloved Rose. Even as he rots away and takes the city down with him, my love still stands. He is in there somewhere, and even if my song fails to bring him back, I'd hope we may reunite in death. Except I know my beloved too well. He refuses to die. Everything hurts. Why am I not dead? I remember falling. I remember something bright, hot. I remember hearing the gods themselves as I fell. I remember Rose was with me. I took his brooch off as I went over the ledge. I remember holding it close to me to hear his heartbeat one last time. Why did you help me? Was that the voice of my beloved, or am I truly mad? I tried to sit up, but failed. I must have broken every bone in my body hitting the ground. I opened my eyes, but everything is blurry. Rose? It's still me, he said. You kept the brooch from shattering. Why? Because you're my husband and I love you. After everything? Of course. I gasped from pain. Why am I not dead? Because you are my husband and I love you. You are not dying while by my side, Edward. I feel the pain numb as mold and rot grow around me and into my flesh, cradling me in my beloved's embrace as I sigh at his touch. I'm here, I hear him say to me. I'll always be right here. Ooh, a bit morbid at the end here. Ooh, a little spooky, icky, but very powerful, well-written nugget, and hopefully I did a good job with the notes that you provided me for the process of reading this. For day 306, the prompt was, how are the changing seasons explained in your setting? And this comes from Nugget in the Discord, and Nugget writes, seasons, an entry in Petrichor. Contrary to popular belief, Petrichor does have seasons. It rains constantly throughout all of them. It always does, but the rotation of the Earth still has some effect through the eternal cloud cover, even if it is in slightly subtle ways. Spring. Storm season. As the world begins to heat up again, the gods become volatile. While rain is always a constant, spring brings more hurricanes, wind, and thunder than the rest of the year. This is also the time organic growth, such as fungus, thrives as the snow melts, contaminating the air and water with spores and pollen, causing irritation. Summer. Humid season. This world continues to heat up. The days become longer, and for once in the year, the city isn't freezing from rain. Instead, they have humidity of 80% or higher. The air is thick and hot. You can practically swim in it, and it sticks to everything, restricting one's ability to even sweat due to the amount of water already in the air. Autumn. Fog season. The city begins to cool, and the fog rolls in now more than any other season. Aside from the increase in fog, this is generally regarded as the most temperate season in Petrichor. The air is cold and clingy, and light has trouble penetrating the dense fog, but otherwise it's mostly just standard Petrichor. Winter, the most dangerous season in Petrichor. Where there is eternal rain, eternal snow is too, and the consequences are what one would expect. The days are short, the city freezes over, and many lower districts get completely buried. Even though active snow is only seen on and off for a few short months, the rain and hail in between are still freezing, and death is most common during winter. On top of this, each season is associated with a different god and a different humor. Spring, the keeper, is associated with phlegm and mucus and allergens. Summer, the frenzied, is associated with blood and heat and fever. Autumn, the avarice, is associated with yellow bile and digestion and the harvest and coming famine. And winter, the decayed, is associated with black bile and death and rot. The gods may not be directly responsible for the seasons, but they are strongest around those times. Cool, great coverage on the city's weather and as it migrates through these seasons. It really seems just like a difficult place to exist. I mean, the logistics of Petrichor are probably such a pain. For day 307, the prompt was, how does a society of yours care for their old? And this comes from The Wanderer in the Discord. Bredwin the Great writes, recycling, reusing, an entry in Rust and Blood, specifically anarchy. To die is to fail, to disappoint. To grow old is to be wasteful, to be pointless. To yield is to sin, to be worthless. Thus you and all of you will never fail, never die, never yield, for we and we alone will march for Hazan. Umbris Calran, the Hellforger of Frosan. The cannons never cease their barrages, the flamethrowers their torching, nor the tanks their crushing. Why should a soldier be any different? Look around you, up and down your trench, and see the monoliths of flesh and bone, screaming and writhing with each step, and remember to never become one, to never grow old, to never be recycled, or ever meet the Hellforger himself. Recycling, your fellow soldiers refer to it as, a less gruesome way to describe becoming a grotesque, mutated thing that only knows rage. Even in death, if your body is found, you will be reclaimed, melted down, and sculpted into something beyond awful, beyond horror. You hold some loyalties to Umbris, but the thought of endless agony, no matter what you do, shakes you to your core. You've been around for centuries. Your beard grows gray. The other dwarves around you look at you like you've already been lost, been killed. You are a dead man walking in the moment, and Ordinal spots you as the moment you'll be dragged away screaming. And it comes, that time of terror. You have known nothing but war for the 700 years you've been alive, and you will continue knowing it despite your mottled skin, wrinkling arms, and weary eyes. You will serve, you will march. You will know no rest, no respite. You fight against the chains, lowering you into the blue, searing liquid. The skin and clothes of those before you clung to the sides like some sick stew. Your toes give away like clay to the fluid. Your nerves light up with agony as the chains lower you into the crucible. Your screams drowned out as your lungs disappeared from their housing. You look up out of the burning hell you've dropped in to see him, the Hell Forger, smiling ear to ear. It is dark for a time, a cold solace, a moment to breathe, to think that maybe, just maybe, the ritual failed and your soul is saved. But no, you are not so fortunate. Your eyes shoot open, the thoughts of 20 others battling with yours as a dozen puppeteers try to move one body. A body full of spikes and tentacles and nothing in relation to your former self, and yet against all your wills, the sound of a whistle and the roar of artillery, you charge out across the scorched earth to hopefully, mercifully, finally die. Fate is not so fortunate to those beyond such things. Just kind of went with a random voice for Umbrus Calran that sounded right, that felt right to me. If that's completely off base, Predwin, let me know. I know that you're very sweet and never really tell me that, but, truly, if something's completely off and you really do have a better image for something, please let me know. But I had some fun with this one, and, man, really well written. I can feel like through the Shoutout Saturdays, I have watched, all of you become better writers, and, Predwin and Nugget, especially writing as much as they have really, really grown, a lot in their ability to, and just, their prose and ability to write is really solid. The Wanderer writes, The Elderly of the Elves. The elves of Endrin do not age in the same manner that you might. Given a few hours of rest, they can revert their age back a day. However, that requires clarity. Elves, actively going through large amounts of stress, danger, or depression, cannot perform that process and will age that day. They hold the same number of days in their lot as humans if they were to forget their process, and so an elderly elf is not based on their number of years, but how difficult those years have been. When an elf reaches an advanced stage of aging, enough to disallow them to care for themselves, they quite often are taken in by family for care. Quite often, elvish homes hold multiple generations of elves. It is not a rare sight to see grandparents, great-grandparents, and in some rare cases, upwards of 9 generations all living in one household. Because of this, nearly all elderly elves have family to rely on. If they didn't have any children themselves, usually a sibling's family will be happy to move them in. The precise care for the elderly isn't dependent on age and the reason for them aging. The most common reason is their spouse passing away. Elves do not remarry, which to humans may seem odd and concerning, given elves nearly don't have a concept for divorce either, but considering elvish courting takes 6 centuries before marriage is considered an option, a reason for divorce is a very scarce one. And for elves, promises, including marriage, is forever. Death does not part it. So when an elf partner dies, their companion often wastes away in grief. The most that their kin can do is try and preserve their life stories. After grief and reasons for aging comes simply small bouts of stress, taking their toll over countless centuries. After that comes injuries that make it harder for concentration and focus. While elves are remarkable healers, they can't heal all injuries and some have no remedy. The care for these 3 all look a little different. For the withering from depression, oftentimes family will attempt to bring joy into the lives of that elf and respark their love for life. While it rarely succeeds, success has happened, and the point of it isn't really to stop their passing, but to make sure they know they were loved. For those aging from injuries, the main focus is comfort, finding ways to help them do hobbies they once were able to and finding new ones within their capacity. Prosthetics limbs are not uncommon, though usually something that can be fixed with prosthetics is not a cause for aging that ends an elf. Usually, though, these injuries cause repetitive pain and discomfort in the elf, so large attempts at making them cozy, comfortable, and safe are the main priority of their kin. Lastly, we have the one that takes the longest to kill, simple wear and tear of life. These steps are present in the other 2 categories, but tend to be much more rapid than that of wear and tear. While an elf's magic doesn't dwindle with age, their physical strength will. They will slowly become frail, and their strength will slowly decay. While elves tend to be stronger than humans, each generation of elves gets roughly 1 to 2% weaker, aged elves will lose that advantage as one of the first signs of age, as do their keen senses dull. That will continue slowly until they are dead. Another sign of aging is that their ability to recall long-forgotten memories will dim. Normally, when an elf meditates, they can view and review their entire life's memories. While elves have superb memories, this system is a necessary one when those memories span multiple millennia. As they age more and more, it gets harder to access those memories. As they get close to what in humans would be their 60s, they might start to lose memories altogether. Those of lesser intensity and with the least revisits will fade entirely, leaving only recent or actively visited memories. By the time an elf meets their equivalent of 70s, mostly their early life and recent events will be on their recollection. They might remember highlights of events, but it mostly will be faded and get foggy. By this time, they're certainly aware of their memories slowly dying. By their 80s, in elf years, their recent memories start getting worse. Eventually, it will die nearly altogether, leaving them in a liminal mind space of their childhood, intense memories, and a fog of their current life. By the time an elf reaches their 90s in elf year, it's a roulette of what will fade. Skills, memories, and bodily functions all start to diminish. What will eventually kill them, if an accident does not, is when an essential life component, such as breathing, eating, drinking, or the beat of their heart, is forgotten. The care for elves in these advanced stages is relatively simple but taxing, and grows more taxing the older they get. Initially, it's just providing them food, then making sure it's softer foods that they can eat, all the while making sure they have enrichment in their lives. After that is caring for them and ensuring they don't forget something that will get them killed, as well as comforting them when their foggy memories lead to distress. That will require more and more care until they become chair-ridden. Usually a comfortable rocking chair with a desk is provided for them that they'll spend most of their later years at. At that point, they'll need to be fed by someone else. Comforting is heavily required at that stage. After that, keeping them alive becomes a difficult task and one that will inevitably fail. During all these stages, attempts at recording their life, lessons they learned, and their musings and opinions on things are all sought to be recorded for the next generations. Man, kind of a sad and somber one. My question now, honestly, would be, if they're still living centuries even in their equivalents of 70s, 80s, and 90s, that is a colossal period of time to take care of someone. It seems like an insane drain on someone. You'd think there would be potential spirals of the drain that causes on other elves, causes them to live not as long. And maybe that's a 1 to 2% decrease. I don't know. For day 308, the prompt was, what is the oldest city in your world? How was it made? How is it maintained, if at all? And this comes from Predwin the Great in the Discord, and Predwin the Great writes, the City of Worms, an entry in What Lies West. Balfora is old. So old that for the past several millennia, the races that came from Balfora originally seem to have forgotten their ancestral home. Dwarves, kobolds, orcs, and so on. These peoples all have their signs of their previous inhabitation scattered throughout both Balfora and even the West itself, but the greatest evidence of any previous civilizations is where the dunes meet the Wormscale reaches, the City of Worms. The city earns its name from its discovery, where the first to find the mighty citadel found the carcasses of 5 ancient dragons reduced to nothing but bone, resting across the city in strange positions, as if they were caught fleeing from something and swiftly killed. The structures within the city are at a glance not originative of any one lineage. At a deeper level of investigation, this holds true, as the sigils, construction, and other identifiable patterns come from the styles of all kinds of people, namely the strong, rocky holds of dwarves and the brutalist, hardy walls of orcs. Though looking closely reveals that the sewers were designed by kobolds and the interiors still intact, having goblin and gnomish furniture styles. Indeed, it seems that the City of Worms was a group project between ancient ancestors of the races within the wider world. Why they fled completely, or even why there are no records of their previous inhabitation, is unknown. To this day, despite the rampant destruction caused by the city's current inhabitants, scholars still try to put together what exactly happened, to no avail. The City of Worms is a decrepit, yet still mighty monument of marble, basalt, and stone. It is, to this day, the largest city ever, and archaeologists suspect it has held that title for well over 20,000 years. This city serves as a major checkpoint to the west, acting as a rest stop and return point for adventurers that desire to venture out into the sands. The city itself has been claimed by the adventurers that reside here, opulent marble buildings being besmirched with rudimentary wooden riveting and scaffolding. Indeed, currently, most of the city is hidden behind convenient wooden walkways, demolition efforts, and the destructive pillaging done by vagabonds looking for artifacts. The City of Worms seems doomed to crumble away as more and more is taken from it, while nothing is ever given. Cool, you've got a city that is sort of the hub of adventurers, and these always end up kind of like cesspools that are the same kind, are a bit, have a bit of character to them, and almost have this interesting draw. The Wanderer writes, Ronstein, the citadel of cities. Endron is old, quite older than most of its inhabitants assuming that they don't assume it's been around forever. It has cities that have been around since it began. However, cities built by ancient gods that still reside in them ages later aren't truly oldest, they're merely existed first. What truly makes a city old is the breadth of generations that have left their mark on it. It's the good, bad, and ugly that makes a city old, not how many years it's seen. So with that said, mortals have the oldest cities, at least in spirit. With that said, Ronstein is the oldest city. While races that many would consider humans have existed since Endrin was made, Anduin being the eldest child of Endrin himself being an elf, humans with all their quirks and sensibilities as a species were born shortly after the Old World ended. Ronstein was a small village formed at the end of the Old World, formed by the Ardria, one of the first few mortal races. They were a race of tall and strong people. As the great storms of the Elder Titan War raged across Endrin, it shattered the landscape and drastically re-altered it. There was a great shard of rock that broke through the surface, and there they found it protected them from the storms and tribulation. They built up a city there, and it endured. They called it Ronstein, which to them meant Protector Rock. As they spread out across their twin subcontinents, they began trading with others and began to set sail across the seas. As they intermixed with others, eventually the Ardria, as a race, died out, not through violence, but interconnectivity. Ronstein, on its structural bones, had been nearly all buried underneath more and more of newer cities. It was a city that had outgrown its founder race. As the city continued, it was nearly burned to the ground during the height of the 9 evils in their age of ruin. But while the city was devastated and conquered by Chevron, it managed to rebuild and grow. They rebuilt great walls and towers, a fortress to make the world marvel, and as the hero of legend was born and delivered a great era of peace, those walls knew peace for a very long time. Furthermore, as such a stronghold as it was not one that anyone sane could battle against with any confidence, so the walls went unused, and with such a scale that they were, and as the space grew more and more scarce, they built buildings upon the walls, and the city, it had developed many names by this point, with Ronstein remembered only by old scholars' records, it became a beacon of wealth, security, and of promising futures. It had corruption, slavery, and vileness, to be sure, but it also had growth, prosperity, and kindness. It was not without fault, but it was a city one could take pride in. By the age in Endrin most often discussed, after the Spell Wars, and by the time cities such as Athal were strong and considered old cities, Ronstein had grown an astounding amount. The peaking cliff on top of the mountain that it was first built on had sunken, and now the city was a cliffside along the coast. Many ruins lie deep under the nearby waters. The city itself is large, spiraling palaces built like cathedrals with an impenetrable fortress as its foundation. It has great spires of towers, stone mansions, and places of many wealthy prices, lords, dukes, diplomats, and sultans. It is a city of wealth. Delving into its underground, old parts of the city can be found. Many have got lost for days, weeks, and a few even months in its underground. It takes on the folk name of the catacomb of cities. There are buried archives, bathhouses with arcane heated and cleaned water buried hundreds of feet beneath stone streets, and buried very deep is its first foundation. Old cities are a thing that Atovia doesn't have, and I love very much. Even in Atovia, there's Morris, which is ancient and has its own problems for having been around as long as it has, but nothing as ancient as this, and stuff like this gives you this sort of just much bigger than humanity feeling, and I like it. For day 309, the prompt was, how do folk mourn in your world? And this comes from Pro and the Great in the Discord. Pro and the Great writes, just passing through an entry in Rust and Blood, specifically Turmoil. Of all the times, eh? Arthur looked out to the bombed-out husk of OTR-55, left out after a scourge of orcs came in the thousands and ravaged the base. I'm sent back here the very day that I left, a year later. The steam crawler, Ricky, loomed behind Arthur with its floodlights scanning the area, sponsons at the ready for any movement to shoot at. Arthur stepped forward, his iron boots crushing down the mangled barbed wire as he made his way through the machine gun emplacements, now collapsed and dripping with fetid water. Behind him, Ricky moved up straight towards the bunker complex, one light following Arthur as the rest continued their search for violence. Each step, Arthur's feet were drugged down by the mulched, liquid remains of those who died here, their agony still in the air as miasma. He scanned the desolated ruins. As empty as they seemed, he felt the presence of those who died here, still begging for mercy from the greenskins, still feeling the searing pain of buckshot to their stomachs. In the distance, Ricky shoots at some unlucky foe that remained here for one reason or another, a greenskin still looting, a cultist preparing a ritual, or a demon just messing about as they do. Whatever it was, it didn't even get a chance to scream, so it doesn't matter. The rain of the plague storm battered against Arthur's suit, but it will hold, it will serve. Continuing his slow march to the main entrance, Arthur saw him, that old officer who kept this place together, old Magson. His carcass looked up to Arthur, maw agape, teeth chattering, voice bubbling. Luckily, Magson had been pinned down by a massive chunk of concrete from a collapsed bunker and was unable to accost Arthur in the slightest. "Still in there, you shouty old man?" Arthur asked as he leant down to meet Magson in the face. "Of course you are. That's how it works, right? That's why the cultists fight so hard, so they don't end up like this. Suppose the fact that you're like this means you didn't yield to the pain god, huh?" Arthur unholstered and raised his pistol to Magson's head. I'll let the higher-ups know, Magson. I respected you. I looked up to you. Despite your prickly attitude and cold stares you gave me, I know now. I know why you're like that, because I'm like that. I've got some holy water. Hopefully that will keep you dead. But if not, I'm sorry. Arthur looked west at the giant looming structure Ricky was stomping through, then looked back to Magson. I'm just passing through. Fun. Okay. This is the guy that was we saw Ricky. There was the girl that was driving Ricky or something, right? I swear I remember this character. Hopefully I'm not going crazy, but I'm glad we got to revisit him. Kendamarania writes, Remembrance in Hell's Slums. The Pride Borough, the sector of Corpi known for having the highest crime and homicide rates in the entire city. However, that does not mean that demon death isn't brushed aside. Each city block is like a tight-knit family with its high concentration of immigrants forming bonds over cultural similarities and economic hardship amidst Corpi's melting pot. When one member of the family dies, the whole block lights in mourning. They didn't just lose a neighbor, but a friend, a spouse, a parent, a child, and a member of the community. More often than not, these deaths come from violence from local gangs or citywide movements such as the Mani Malvagi or the Blank Sinners. As such, these communities frequently end up in a cycle of vengeance and hatred, eating away at each other as their grief consumes them, unable to move on from the past as they incite more violence amongst pride. It's a commonly held belief in hell that all demonic beings have no afterlife, as they already live in the second world. Additionally, a soul, defined as a blessing from God's creation, does not exist for demons, and thus they are not indestructible for the call of final judgment. As such, death is not taken lightly, as taking someone's life is seen as permanently erasing their existence from the realm where they will remain dead for eternity. However, some immigrant cultures in Pride take special care for a deceased one's memory, as that is the only remnant they leave before death. The dead in Pride, especially those from violence and war, are immortalized within the tight communities as they hold on to the only proof that their loved one existed. I do find the line, as such, death is not taken lightly, to be sort of fun, because who takes death lightly? But I suppose if you're a bunch of demons, maybe that isn't something you take for granted anyways, death not being taken lightly. Curio Heart V3.5 RC4 writes, Altars for the Deceased. When death happens in Valley Forge, it only sometimes leaves behind a corpse. And when it does, it's rarely around for long. When someone goes missing, those close to them pray for fate to be swift, whether that be their return or their death. Nobody wants the bodies. Nobody wants to see what happened to them if they weren't already there. Not when everyone knows what Valley Forge does to people. In most households, especially the slums of Sewer City, it's more common for friends, family, and loved ones to be mourned through altars containing some combination of images, personal effects of the deceased, and offerings of mourning that generally consist of food, drink, and the occasional small flower, assuming one can be found. While most of these are small and personal, some of the more locally noteworthy individuals wind up with much larger altars dedicated to their memory. These larger altars will have a wider variety of offerings and may include personal items that had once been given by the deceased, items that would reference some event, and other symbols of appreciation from those who were affected by their life. Sometimes, a more permanent structure is built to honor to the dead, though this is exceptionally rare. One prominent example is the eerily realistic statue of the Cleansing Flame that stands near the entrance of every church and clinic that the Church of the Cleansing Flame operates, welcoming everyone inside with the same warm look and inviting posture that they were known for in life. While the Cleansing Flame themselves is long dead, it's common to find small offerings placed on and around these statues, each one someone's offering of personal thanks to an individual whose actions more than a century ago inspired the foundation of an organization so dedicated to the health of the people without thought of cost. Nice. This feels very Eastern world inspired a little bit, and I like it. It kind of makes sense. Cyberpunk often leans in that direction, and I know that you have stated before that your world is a little cyberpunky, I believe. Hopefully I'm getting that correct, but I like this. For day 310, the prompt was, are there any creatures assumed to be myth that are actually real? This comes from Predwin the Great in the Discord, and Predwin the Great writes, Beholders, an entry in Rust and Blood, specifically Turmoil. In the harsh wastes of Gerla, it is said time and time again, life is hard. Aberrations, bandits, and the elements can all work against any who try to survive outside, but among all these dangers is one that can hide in plain sight. Rumors. There are many stories the Carhop people share, some true, most fictitious, but among these tall tales is a beast so deadly that only one man has ever escaped one, and nobody has ever believed his tale 40 years later. Beholders. So the tale goes. A beast with 100 eyes, a dozen legs, and a whispering, sentient tongue that drives nails into your thoughts. A spindly, extra-legged spider that hides away in the darkest caves, the tallest mountains, the deepest lakes, and waits for those who would dare approach its den. It will speak in the voice of your mother, your children, and you will believe it, for its words are that of the celestials, words of power. You will step closer and closer to the mouth of its hole, and when you look into it seeking for the vaguest form of something within, the beast will make itself known. Slow, deliberate steps from out its den, its legs wrapping behind you as its 100 eyes pulse like a heartbeat looming from the darkness to you. The man who escaped claimed that the beast spoke with him and told him to spread tale of it and its brother's awakening, to warn the parasites that their time runs thin, to leave, to live. Many think he was hallucinating and simply, rarely, escaped the clutches of a Slamhulk, another spider-like aberration that earns its name from using a psionic shield to tank attack while it brutally grabs and slams tribesmen into the dirt until they are unconscious before running away to recover their shield and finish off their victim. But no, these monsters are real, they are malevolent, and they can see all. They are beholden to all. Beholders are massive spider-like aberrations that tower above their prey at 30 feet tall with a leg span of 120 feet. They are capable of squeezing through spaces only 20 feet across and can manipulate objects with psychic power. While their true number is unknown, there must be at least 3 of these beasts, though the people of Turmoil are never so fortunate to be short of foes. Really cool take on Beholders, a fitting reskin for something like Rust and Blood, I think. More eldritch, honestly, and more freaky, in my opinion, than traditional 5th edition style Beholders, so I dig this a lot. Nugget writes, the gods are myth, right? An entry in Time Traveler and the Immortal. The world had yet to correct itself after the gods tore it apart in their war. It was so very recent by this point. Emrys walked through the ancient streets, going home after finishing his errands for the day, as was the case every day since he was left behind on Earth. But that was not the case today. Today he walked home, but was interrupted by the strangest thing. There was a loud crack, followed by the sudden appearance of a figure in front of him, screaming and flickering in pain. He did not stay in the same place long, but rather phased and snapped into the world around him, shaking violently as the physical plane rejected his presence. Emrys instinctively stepped back. It was as if he were both there and not at the same time, but it was clear he was in pain. As suddenly as he appeared, the man was finally thrown out of the sorry state onto the ground, where he went entirely limp. Emrys just stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened, looking around to see if anyone else had seen. No. They were alone. Was that magic? No, if it was, Emrys would know. This was something else. The man hadn't moved. Emrys summoned a dagger to his hand and cautiously approached. Esne bene? Emrys asked. The man was still unresponsive as he nudged him. His appearance was also quite odd. He was very small and frail, with long black hair, the white streak running through it, and was covered in various burns and lacerations. His attire, however, it was like nothing Emrys had ever seen. It wore bright green, far too vibrant to be from any dyes he was familiar with. The fabric hugged his body tightly as opposed to being draped, and rested over a fine white tunic out of what seemed to be linen. He couldn't even begin to describe the rest of the outfit for how out of reality it was. Not that he had time, for the longer he watched the man, the clearer it was he was bleeding out. Emrys bit his lips as he thought. He was too curious to let him die here. He made his decision and picked him up. He didn't live far, and he'd have an easier time tending his wounds at home. Emrys set the man down on his bed and began healing him with a combination of magic and practical medicinal skill, and soon heard the man groan as he began to regain consciousness. Salve, Emrys said. Mihi nomen est Emrys? Unde venistis? The man looked at him with recognition, and perhaps fear, as he tried to back away from Emrys. Countess, that was magic, the man said, panicked. Well, yes, you were bleeding out. Which? God, actually, don't discredit me. The gods aren't real, they're myth, legends. Emrys couldn't help but laugh at this. How did you come to that conclusion? What was your name? Victor, he said, Victor Cogwin. Emrys, pleasure to meet you. I'm a man of science. Gods and magic cannot exist. So what was that earlier? Science, Victor said. The time machine, specifically. My first test of it, anyway. What year is it? About 50 ADW, I think. Don't really keep track too heavily. 1800 years backwards, then. Not bad. You nearly died. I'll work it out. But you can't really be a god. Why not? Even if they did exist outside of myth, they're long dead. As of 50 years ago, most are, but wars have survivors. I'm still here, flesh, blood, and divine. As Emrys said this, his hair and eyes shone bright gold, lighting up the room with his glow. How are you? It doesn't make sense. I don't know what else to tell you, Victor, Ember said smugly. History often lies. Nice, so this is the first meeting between Emrys and Victor. That's cool, we get to finally see that. Thank you, Nugget. Kendamarania writes, fairies hidden from the world. Fairies are creatures native to the dreamlike world of Phaeland. Beings under the umbrella of fairies include river spirits, tree giants, wicked crones, gear whizzes, mechanical dragons, all manner of talking animals and beasts, and pucks, the most humanoid of the fairies. Frequently, these creatures have inherent magic that they can use, although the exact rules and limits of this magic is entirely unknown. Such is the frustrating nature of a world as surreal as Phaeland. Fairies from Phaeland used to cross into the human world to enact all sorts of wondrous miracles and phenomenon that humans could not understand with practices such as science or religion. However, as civilization moved forward, they began to fear the big people and hide themselves from humans, letting them attend to their own business. Humans then began pass on fairy stories into folktale and legends, passing it off as mere fiction, but their magic still persists, leading the unlikeliest of people to a wonderland far unlike their own. This is interesting. It's very short, has some really interesting implications, like what led to the fairies of Phaeland being afraid of the big people. There's got to be some inciting incident here, right? Or some series of incidents that would cause such a thing. For day 311, the prompt was, if your world has winter, how is it celebrated? What festivals surround it, if any? This was the beginning of our short advent to build together, and so the rest of the prompts after this for a little while are going to be winter or Christmas or holiday themed in some respect, at least tangentially related. Carhop writes, Harvest's End, an entry in Solitaire. The cadets are cold, sir. Thomason, a razor of a man with slicked back hair and the face of a lion, reported. He shivered slightly himself, despite the fleeced-lined coat he wore over his black Luxor uniform. Still, he stood at attention, awaiting his photon's reply. I can wait for the bonfire, Luxor Thomason, Dratus grunted back, busily scrawling away in a little black book. It's good for them to learn to endure the cold. Prepares them to deal with the sun-drinker territories. The photon scowls as his hand slips while writing, smearing ink across the page in the heel of his palm. I understand, sir, but it is Harvest's End. That's why we're having a bonfire, Thomason. Aye, sir, I'm aware. However, morale is... Enough about it, Thomason, the photon growled, looking up from his work. This blasted half-year of fog has crippled our energy stores, and there's a better chance of the sun-drinkers crawling back into the pit they came from than the Council approving non-emergency gas generator use. We've been over this a dozen times. A vein pulsed at Arne Dratus' ivory-capped temple as his ink-stained hand crashed into the hardwood desktop. He paused, darkness covering his bow as he gave his fist a forlorn look. Suffocating silence hung between the two men for a minute before the photon took a deep breath and continued. Now, unless you have other matters that need addressing, please ensure we have enough fleece and cotton for the cadets to knit their thermal stockings. Just one more thing, sir, Thomason continued bluntly, unwavering at the photon's outburst. The Energy Council has sent the camp several dozen gallons of milk, along with the similar amounts of chicoco, lard, ground sweet stock, and grain. Shall I instruct the cooks to begin making hearth brew and ends sweets now, or would you prefer them to prepare at intervals throughout the season? Have them prepare a large amount for tonight and use whatever is left to prepare sweets once per week. 2 cookies and 1 piece of candy per cadet until bloomtide. Very good, sir. I'll go to the cook's tent now. Thomason stood still despite his words, staring unblinkingly at the photon. Arne nodded, giving the Luxor a quick salute with perfect form. Very good. Be dismissed. Thomason turned on a heel and began to exit the command tent, but was surprised by the photon clearing his throat. And Lucas, Please don't mention it, sir. Arne huffed, pinching the bridge of his nose. You may take time for a cigarette before returning to your duties, Luxor Thomason. It is Harvest Ends, after all. A wry smile crossed the younger man's lips. Very good, sir. Much obliged. Looks like we ought to look at another photon. They seem to be the top of some level of a hierarchy here. Like another top, but the top in a given area, it seems, in a specific portion of space. They seem to be the top of a militaristic kind of hierarchy. Not sure yet, but I'm liking this so far. I find it pretty compelling. I am excited to learn more. Curio Heart, V3.5 RC4, writes, Winter in Avari Valley. World building by Auhminous and Curio Heart. Warning, descriptions ahead involve cannibalistic behavior. Winter in Valley Forge is nothing to be celebrated. The summers are bad enough. Though it now goes by Avari Valley, it resides in what was once Death Valley, long since transformed by weather seeding that keeps the sky cloudy and precipitating for much of the year. While the system works well, it has also utterly transformed the weather cycle of the region. Spring is pleasant, if wet. Heavy rains are common with and without thunder, but the temperatures hover comfortably between 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, or 15 to 28 Celsius. Fall isn't too much different. Summer is when the sun's notorious scorching of the region causes the weather system to struggle with seeding, resulting in very little rain, and more periods where the sun turns the region into a sauna than anyone wants to admit to, and heat stroke is an inevitability rather than a question for long-term exposure. Only the wealthiest are able to completely avoid this, and you can reliably bet that they'll only be caught outside dead or when something has gone horrifically wrong in their lives. But winter? Winter is when nature reminds the city that they built it in the desert. Thanks to the way megacorporations have reshaped both weather and the world, Avari Valley's winters are deeply cold, bitter, and bone-dry. To be left outside is a death sentence to all but the morphics who thrive in the frozen wastes of places like Antarctica. Because of the severity of the weather, mega farms are unable to grow food. To survive unscathed is to stockpile food, yet the only ones who can afford to are the wealthy. To everyone else, the food shortages quickly become the least of your concerns. While many months still retain their Julian names, 2 in particular have taken more Gaelic names within the region. After November, the month turns to Noliak, the long dark. While the cold is bitter and often dry, it still manages to snow, often just enough to keep the ground slushy thanks to the heat from the buildings, pavement, and vehicles constantly moving through the city. It's windy, too, yet to move about is to wear waterproof outerwear or you're almost guaranteed a trip to the hospital with frostbite. Sewer City isn't so lucky. There, the snow doesn't melt, and the small amount of exterior warmth that the rest of the city enjoys is non-existent. There, with a bitter wind howling around you, your time outside is often measured in minutes, not hours, lest you succumb to its incessant wrath. This is also the period when the corpse gatherers of the city, the last people anyone wants to see, are their busiest. When nothing else can be found, corpses are often plentiful and cheap to break down into more palatable ingredients. Companies will gladly pay for any ingredients they can to produce food and keep their profits up, no matter the source. Cramps, as these people are known, specialize in turning corpses to the raw ingredients needed to make nutrition-dense, if somewhat tasteless, food like protein bars and starch powders that are sold to the lower classes to eat at prices they can barely afford. Here, as the nights approach their longest for the year and around the time the solstice was once celebrated, foragers instead turn to a somber Saturnalia. While the aim is to make it what was once the winter solstice, each household has theirs at different times. Everyone knows the signs. Cupboards are running low, fridges are closer to empty. Usually there's enough for 2 smaller meals or 1 larger meal. Few choose to split it up. This creates something of a feast, though it's tainted by the knowledge that this meal is going to be one of the last until the cold breaks, hopefully by late February. The last 2 weeks of the month are generally quiet, if hungry. What little food can be found vanishes quickly, yet never thanks to the rats that infest the city, for they've long since gone underground, where things are warmer and other foods the humans and morphics can't eat may be found. By the time the year turns, Valley Forge will tell you that it is now Aenair, for the wolves are now emerging. Left to little else, all but the wealthiest districts begin to turn to the closest thing they can to food because it's the only fare too stubborn to leave and hasn't yet died. For some, this is no different from normal, but to most this is a complete and entirely necessary departure as they fight to survive what's hopefully only going to last the next 2 months. Just long enough for the cold to break and food to restart distribution. And Valley Forge, the summers are bad enough. The winters, though, are deadly. Whew, yeah. This is some pretty grimdark stuff. Selling off the dead to corporations who then just spike the costs for the people below them. Yeah, rough stuff. For day 312, the prompt was, what stories surround the winter season or the cold in your world? Kendamarania writes, the gold frozen city. Fire flickered from the oil barrel in the dilapidated house as rain poured from the outside. Such weather was typical in Wrath, the tipper-tapper bouncing on the metal roof, loud enough to drown out the yells, insults, and slurs hurled by the sinners drowning in the river Styx. The ferrymen, hiding in the safe house, needed to savor this peace even when the winter air was freezing them to death. Tending the fire and cooking the cheap, disgusting military rations in the pot was Oksana, shivering her brittle bones and trying to dry her sewer-stained trenchcoat. Chertvozmil, we couldn't find a better safe house. This place is infested with tetraserpents and rats. She chattered her teeth and rubbed her hands together. Sitting by Oksana was a fellow ferryman and sinner, Phlegius, whetting his archaic sword and polishing his flintlock pistol. Nonsense, my dear. The best fighters and soldiers are able to survive in even the harshest conditions. My company in Jerusalem once endured 15 days lost in the desert, surviving off nothing but your horse's milk, Oksana sighed. Precisely, Oxy, Phlegius jollily laughed. Modern-day sinners such as yourself don't know how lucky you are to have died in this day and age with all of your fancy air conditioning and electricity. Lucky. My family nearly froze to death during the winter. The cold air here isn't even comparable to Petrograd anyways. Sparks flew from Phlegius's blade as he continued wetting it. But that's where you're wrong. I've heard many road tales from my passengers about the cold to the top of Pandemonium, snow covering the gold palaces head to toe, the traders damned there stuck in the frozen lake. To survive up there, where the air is thin, is a death sentence. But it wasn't like that originally, right? Si, non solo questo. Phlegius settled his sword to his side. It was a curse set upon the ghosts of the past. I once met a little sinner boy who was there to bear witness to it on that fateful winter day, 1838, when Sathanas got executed. That fallen angel, what did he have to do with it? Oksana tilted her head, no longer attending the food. He said that as Sathanas was being brought out of the meeting hall to be decapitated by the guillotine, he was yelling something in Enochian. He only learned later what it meant. Curse be to the people of Pandemonium. Hundreds of thousands are brought here, forsaken by their god. He will not come to save you, for you have disobeyed his highest order of keeping peace throughout the realm. Sathanas died muttering that same curse over and over. Even as his head was rolling up the blade, he kept it as his final breath. She scoffed. So it's a load of imperialist jargon. Not quite, Phlegius corrected her. Yes, he died rambling mad as he always had been, but as Beelzebub moved everyone over to Corpi, those who chose to stay behind felt something strange in the old city, now left abandoned. Voices whispering in the wind, the blow of trumpets signaling the death of a nobleman echoing through the empty streets. The little boy I mentioned stayed behind as well, and he swore that he felt the air become thinner, his lungs choking on itself. He continued on. And then winter came, and then spring, summer, fall, it just kept getting colder. The Golden City became buried under meters of snow, old statues of Lucifer torn apart from years of neglect and despair. The remaining citizens were buried under ruins and harsh blizzards, surviving only off the heat of Lake Cocytus, when it still kept burning its fire in those days. I saw it for myself before. You mean the lake in Treachery, right? That's why some people call it the Lake of Fire? Oksana asked, pulling in even closer to his story. Indeed, he nodded. But of course, you know how it is now, frozen all over, housing the traders from head to toe with ice, but how the eternal lake of fire came to freeze. Unfortunately, the Sinner Boy never elaborated on it, possibly because of his particularly sad condition after being damned here for 200 years. Phlegius twirled his finger around. All he said was that one day the flames simply snuffed out, only 10 years after Sathanas' execution. Since then it became frozen solid, and now Corpi reuses the old city for torture. He likened it to divine retribution from God for what we did. A final message saying we ruined our chance of redemption, and now our former glory had been frozen away. Oksana chuckled. Was that boy pro-Sathanas then? He shrugged. Perhaps. Like I said, he might have lost his mind a while ago. I simply think it's poetic that it occurred. Like the ghosts of the past coming to freeze what legacy it had left. The stories I've always heard said that it was Sathanas' spirit that blew the wind and snow long after he died, restless until everyone remained was driven out. Phlegius stroked his beard in deep thought. Or it could be a tale to make sense of the senseless. That's how I always thought of the little stories I was told of as a little girl, she answered back. Hell simply claimed back what it lost from the old regime. That too, Phlegius smiled, before sniffing the rising smoke from the oil barrel. Wait, Oxy, you tended to the soup, correct? Realizing that she indeed forgot their meal, Oksana came up to uncover the pot lid over the flame, seeing the charred, burnt soup floating with the stock. Sukableit. Merda, Phlegius face-palmed. This was fun. Hopefully I did okay with the voices. I actually really haven't exercised my Russian accent in a while. I used to be pretty proficient with that one. I wasn't sure what Phlegius was supposed to have. I got an idea maybe Spanish later on, but I was also like, if he's been down here a really long time, then maybe he would be closer to a accentless voice being surrounded by other voices. But, I have no idea. If you have something more correct, please let me know, and I can try and remember that if we ever get these characters, or at least one of them, again. For the final submission of Shoutout Saturday number 29 is Curio Heart V3.5 RC4 writing The Cramps. World building by Auhminous and Curio Heart. Warning, the lore presented here describes something very much like Soylent Green, not exactly cannibalism, but too close for it to be anything but disturbing. It also hints at cannibalism, or similar tendencies at least, with sentience eating sentience. The Rise of the Cramps. So you wish for a tale of the valley's winters, do you? The old woman let out a raspy laugh that almost sounded like a hiss of warning. You must not be familiar with our city, then. Very well, I have one for you. One from Valley Forge's history. One that everyone that lives here is familiar with, because it's one of the few that has survived the corporate rewrites. She reaches onto the table, grabbing 2 of the mugs turned over on the stained tablecloth. Grabbing the large thermos next to the other almost half-dozen mugs, which had several strings hanging from it to secure the tea bags within, she loosened the lid with a shaky yet practiced hand and poured some steaming tea into each mug. She slid one closer to you. "Winter is approaching anyways, and we'll need to begin preparing for it soon enough. It's better you know what to expect before it gets here." Cramps, just like their closest namesake, they're always annoying, but usually something that can be ignored. Sometimes, though, they become a familiar kind of pain that nobody wants. For the Cramps of Valley Forge, that's winter. While their presence is known and felt year-round, it's only during the winter that their presence is not only unwanted, but feared. During winter, they swoop in like peregrine falcons, snatching bodies before they've had a chance to fully cool, even outside in the frozen waste that Sewer City becomes. It wasn't always like this, of course. Once upon a time, the Cramps didn't exist at all. But that time passed long ago, and only the city's oldest can recall those years from more than a century ago. Before the festering lake developed, before the collapse, before the megacorporations became the all-consuming monstrosities they are now. Before all of that, Avari Valley was anything but hospitable, and the Valley Forge was barely a dot, a town of the desperate for the desperate, in one of the most desolate places in the American Southwest. For before it was Avari Valley, it was death. And then Michael Avari arrived, and with him the Avari Cedar Corporation. In an attempt to combat the ever-growing climate crisis, the government had funded several competing projects to create cloud seeders of any kind, stationary or mobile. It simply had to work reliably. Avari, through his company, had received one such grant, and his design succeeded where others failed. The spring after it was completed, the valley saw more rain than it had for the decade prior. The valley flooded, and its ancient lake began to reform. After dealing with a significant financial setback in the summer, the Cedar resumed operations by fall, flooding the valley once again. By then, the city had nearly tripled in size, from a struggling town of a few thousand to just over 10,000. The Avari Cedar Corporation funded much of the construction to help speed things along and brought much of the land in the process. It began to plot and plan fully automated, easily scalable farms for much of it, but the rest, near the rising lake and Furnace Creek, that would be sold to the highest bidders, to attract new businesses and continue growing the city while earning him even more. The first winters were surprisingly cold. Temperatures regularly dropped below freezing at night from early December until late February. Avari helped by providing interim space heaters until they could install proper furnaces. They hadn't anticipated temperatures cooling so much, and so hadn't included them in the home designs. By and large, the growing city got through the winter. After a year much like the previous, after the Cedar was brought online, aside from slightly more cloud cover during the summer, the second winter was even worse. Temperatures remained below freezing, rarely getting high enough to melt the snow that, for the first time everyone knew of, began to fall. Roads froze over, and a city lacking any road salt supply couldn't get a consistent supply of food in. The people went hungry, but enough food came in to prevent starvation. By the third winter, Valley Forge was ready, or so they thought. They prepared for a winter hovering between 0 Fahrenheit to about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. What they got was an Antarctic summer. Temperatures were rarely, if ever, positive. More often than not, they were firmly negative, with highs of negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit considered warm that year. The power grid wasn't ready either, for the strain due to heating demands caused numerous blackouts. Hundreds froze, most went hungry, some were starving. Except, that is, Avari and his employees. While they hadn't anticipated how cold it would be, some overzealous doomsday planning led to the company stocking up on anything that would be useful, warm, and filling, even in the worst sub-zero conditions. As word got out that people were freezing and with the city struggling to get food in, Avari did what he did best. He capitalized on the situation. Within days of the first reports, a new company was founded, tagging alongside those working to restore power and checking homes for their deceased, which would be collected in trailers and hauled away as they were discovered. They wore red, too, with Crampit emblazoned on the back. Some would claim they had antlers, but everyone knew the bags they carried with them. Quickly, they became known as Cramps, and soon after, Crampit protein bars began to appear on shelves. Nutrient-dense, chewy, barely flavored, odd textures, the works. It didn't take long for people to piece together what went into it. And still, it was food. Sometimes a neighbor would disappear. While upsetting, nobody would say much beyond words of condolences. Even those closest rarely did anything, even when they knew who did it. In those cases, everyone knew why. They all could feel it. In conditions like that, you do what you have to. But Crampit protein bars, however bad they are, still manage to be a step above. At least then, your hands aren't directly involved. Even Avari, the company, as Michael is long dead, keeps their hands only indirectly near it because they own the company, just like it did when it was created. In present-day Valley Forge, Crampit is still in operation, making its protein bars and collecting bodies. It's an all-year effort now, but winter remains their busiest time. Even today, people fear their arrival in winter even when they shrug them off the rest of the year. The current surveillance state allows them to determine deaths in the winter so quickly that they often know before anyone else. If they arrive, someone died within the last 10 minutes, even in Sewer City. In Valley Forge, nobody wants the bodies anyway, not of their kin at least, whether blood or chosen. But sometimes they'd like a little time with them first. Cool. I'm glad we got like almost a bit of a teaser for the cramps, and then a more thorough explanation of kind of what's going on here. I have a lot of interesting questions. I'm glad we got a little bit more background on Valley Forge here. This was also really cool. I'm getting a bigger picture of the world that's going on. Really curious about like the metaphysics or some of the physics behind cloud seeding. I have never looked into that. I have no idea how that works. Would temperatures actually drop like this, or is there more going on here? Kind of fascinating. A small update before I cap things off for this Shoutout Saturday. We're going to be doing a little bit of a branding change and also potentially really improving the amount of accessibility that we have to Shoutout Saturday. I'm going to be changing the name because I don't think that Shoutout Saturday really fits exactly what we're doing here anymore. I might reset the counter as well. I'm going to call it something else along the lines of reading the universe or reading the multiverse or writer spotlight or something that evokes a little bit more of what we're trying to do here. And I'm also going to be attempting to distribute it via really as many long-form listener environments as possible. So it'll basically be a podcast. It would go on Spotify and Apple Music and everywhere else where you get podcasts. It would also likely, I think, in the future, we will give it its own YouTube channel to be sort of dedicated to this kind of thing. That'll give me some sort of cognitive room to maybe put stuff on that channel that's relative to things like the Q&As that we do, or me interviewing people about their worlds if we want to do some deep dives or something in the future. It opens up a lot of room, I think, for there to be expansion in the area of what Shoutout Saturday has become, which is honestly a lot cooler and a lot bigger than what I even really intended or thought it could be when I first started it. There you have it, everyone. That is the end of Shoutout Saturday number 29. Thank you, everyone, for watching. This one's super, super late, but that is because holiday season is always hectic and crazy. Now, if you want to support me, the channel, the community, then please, think about subscribing or commenting something. That's always very much appreciated. But as always, if you do not do that, then that is totally fine. The videos are still going to get made. People's writing is still going to happen. If you want to see your own stuff, then feel free to come to the Discord and submit something for the daily prompt in the Build Together forum. We would love to have more writers. It is always cool to have even more worlds to look at. I hope you enjoyed the peek at these worlds. But either way, I hope you have a wonderful Saturday or whatever day it is that you're watching this. I will see you later. Goodbye.